last night we had Philip Perlstein, one of the great living American masters, right in this room. A month ago we had Wayne Thiebaud, my friend, come out from California to give a presentation. And one after the other, we're looking at how different ways American masters have changed our country and our culture. And we're really about culture here, and painting and interpreting into your own voice. Talking of American masters, my friend Michael White here agreed to come today and do a lecture that you and I have done a couple, 3 times in various ways. And it really talks about the crossover between painting and art. Michael played for a dozen years or so at Village Vanguard over New Year's week. Some of you were lucky enough to hear him and see him perform. There was a recording of one of those sessions that was Grammy nominated several years ago. He's also played in New Orleans in a whole number of the top venues over there. People say, did he play Preservation Hall when he was almost a child? Is that right? He is still almost a child. There's a tie between creativity, the discipline of learning your instrument technically, and a sense of spirituality. And we watch these 3 parts come together in your lifelong work. I saw him play in Carnegie Hall across the street. He's played at Lincoln Center with Wynton. He's truly has a love and a commitment to having a very personal voice with the clarinet. And he's had a close friendship with people who paint. I'm lucky to be one of them over the years. So I present to you Dr. Michael White. Thank you. You more comfortable sitting? Yeah, that's it. Okay. All right. So, may I throw out a first question from me as moderator? Lawrence Binion says the tie between painting and the other arts, the closest tie is poetry. Yet he said that opens the door to an argument that the tie is really music. And this debate between is the closest poetry or music. They said that the Germans said, and the British said at the same time about 100 years ago, that a painting is a silent poem. And they were very proud of coming up with that. And some Chinese scholars said the Chinese have been saying that for 3,000 years. Now, when we talk about this, they talk about rhythm or tone. Which one's more important, rhythm or tone?
Well, I think rhythm and tone are equally important, different aspects of the music. The rhythm, of course, is the foundation of everything. I tell the musicians in my band that the rhythm is the foundation for everything that we do. So if you don't have good rhythm, then it diminishes the quality of everything else and the potential for everything else to be as good as it could be. In my younger years as a musician, I had the blessing and good fortune to meet, know, and work with, befriend more than 3 dozen musicians that were in a much older generation. Nowadays, when they talk about old musicians, they talk about me. But I'm talking about over 3 dozen guys that were born between the late 1890s and 1910. So I had the opportunity to play, for example, with guys that were older than Louis Armstrong. And those musicians taught me a lot about not only music, but life. And I started to see the music in a sense as an art form, as a folk art, and an expression of life that was both collective and individual. And so concepts like rhythm and tone became extremely important. In the old days, all of those musicians had to have great timing. The rhythm section, of course, meaning the drums, the bass, the piano, and the banjo. But the other instruments, the horns, clarinets, trumpets, trombones, also played with rhythm. They played rhythmically, and they would play rhythmically together. So like when people ask me about the role of the clarinet, I say, well, I can play counter melody or response to the trumpet's lead. I can play in harmony with the trumpet's lead, playing the same rhythm but with different notes that blend in and add to the thickness of the texture of the music. Or I can play rhythmically to support the rhythm and the flow of the song. It's like an addition or a complement to the rhythm section. And that's a very important part of the music.
Well, if do you think we can cover most of that in the next hour?
We can try.
All right, we'll make a stab at it. You guys like that? I hope so. First, you talk about being, young musicians just want to get the notes right. And so you see people, I remember once you said you knew a musician who never made a mistake, but they had all the creativity of a typist who just didn't make a mistake. And we talked in the past about certain songs that, and the same thing happens with a painting. If you look at your subject, you can ask yourself, how do I feel today? And we could all paint the same subject with a different mood. Could you maybe take a song and play it absolutely straight, and then maybe do it? You did this once with what would you say, Sweet By and By?
Okay. Yeah, in the New Orleans jazz tradition, one of the things that, in addition to stylistic characteristics, one of the things that makes New Orleans jazz different is it's the only major style of jazz that regularly uses different forms like hymns as a regular part of the music. They use hymns, blues, marches, folk songs, ballads, rags from ragtime. But hymns are a very important part of the music. I don't think I play a job where I don't play hymns. I don't think I've made a recording where I haven't played hymns. And I have composed also a number of hymns. Slow hymns, fast hymns. Sometimes we play church concerts where we play nothing but hymns. And there used to be a tradition in New Orleans that is now extinct of Sunday morning church parades. And at the insistence of the ministers, they would come out every time and they would tell the band leader, now look, none of that jazz, you hear? Now they're hiring a brass band, but they don't want jazz.
So you obeyed, didn't you?
Well, they say just play hymns, and all we played were up-tempo standard hymns, like Just a Closer Walk with Thee, By and By, Over in the Glory Land, When the Saints Go Marching In, Down by the Riverside, songs like that. But we played them in the same jazz style that we always played them in, and the reverend and everybody would be happy because they would hear the melody. But it was funny to see the provisions of church members, all well-dressed in suits and white dresses and with banners, and to see them gracefully strutting along with the music, trying not to break out into this wild second-line dance that they normally do to this music. So hymns were a very important part. And one of the things we're talking about is that we could take a hymn like an old standard hymn called In the Sweet By and By. If we saw this as written music and played it as it were written, it would be pretty bland and kind of dull. Let me see if I can get a good tempo.
No, it's pretty nice the way you do it. These people are into it. It's got a nice, you've got a good tone.
I'm surprised anybody's still awake after that.
That's kind of like, in ours, it's like copying the model as opposed to interpreting. Could you give it a voice now?
But in jazz, the idea is to insert your own personal interpretation, not only in completely improvising away from the melody, but improvising the way the melody is played. So for example, the trumpet players normally play the lead or the melody, the recognizable part of the song. So I'll just go over the first few bars. Instead of going like this, a trumpet player in New Orleans jazz might do something like this. But that's one way of doing it. The same trumpet player might play it different every time. And every trumpet player played it different. They had their own way of expressing the melody. And you can do that by extending or changing notes, adding little rhythms to some of the notes, bending tones, and a wide variety of effects and colors that we also use when we speak. Vocal effects, singing effects. Okay? So that very beginning of the song, I could do any number of ways. And it's endless. It depends on how you feel at the time.
Could it take on the voice of somebody else who can't express themselves? I remember you once said that you played that to represent the voice of a widow at funerals. Can you still?
Some of you probably heard about our infamous jazz funeral tradition in New Orleans. That's a very real thing. They talk about it in the history of jazz, in the biographies of many musicians, Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, Sidney Bechet, and many others. But the jazz funeral tradition is a very real thing that still goes on today. In my life, I estimated that I've played close to 200 jazz funerals in my career. And I still play jazz funerals. And the role of the clarinet in the jazz funeral, as Tim said, is like the weeping widow, because everything in the funeral is symbolic. The trumpets are sort of like the reverend or preacher giving a call. The trombones are like moaning, sorrowful males. The saxophones are like everyone else is sort of like members of the family moaning. The drum beat sort of alerts us to the passing of life, and also just the movement of the procession. And so the clarinet, instead of playing like I might normally play in a jazz band,
same song?
Same song, In the Sweet By and By. If the trumpet in a normal jazz band is going, I would be playing this against that. There we go. Okay, but in the jazz funeral, the role of the weeping widow is high and wailing above the ensemble. So if I played the melody in a jazz funeral, I'd play it in the upper register. Sorry if you have delicate ears, but here we go. That's the melody. That's the melody that the trumpet would play, but I would be more likely to play something like this. When they're going, I would be the same melody and the same chord structure, but played in a different tempo, a different context, a different mood. Okay?
Can I?
Sure.
Because we got a bunch of stuff to cover, but I want to move to further into the funeral. Could it be the preacher saying a few kind words? Same song?
Yeah. So the trumpet player would kind of play that role, and it would be lower. The other horns, the preacher is telling a story about the person, is preaching a sermon. The other horns are chiming in like they do in black Protestant churches. They're saying amen, they're co-signing. Sometimes people break out into song that might have a melody that's different but related. Those kind of things are what's happening in the theater of the jazz funeral. Okay? But it all comes together, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. The music has changed quite a lot now. It's rare to hear those old and see those old jazz funerals that I was used to, because times have changed, generations have changed, the music has changed, the brass bands have changed. But every now and then you still can see an old style jazz funeral. Now at the end of the funeral, if I may,
sure.
The first part with the slow hymns is to honor the passing of a person, the sadness we feel, the grief at the loss. The person is gone, won't be with us anymore. So after the sermon in the church or funeral home, there's the slow procession with this sad music that goes on for a few blocks. And then if the funeral home is too far away, the band divides into two in the street, and the ceremony passes through with one final dirge. If the cemetery is close, we go all the way. But at any rate, once the procession gets a respectable distance away, or if the body is buried, after that there is joyous up-tempo music and dancing by the crowd, sometimes the family, sometimes social club members, or whoever turns out. And that part of the jazz funeral, which may seem strange to people, having someone laughing and dancing and having a good time after someone's funeral, actually is a beautiful symbolic part of the process. And it's based on the old saying that we should cry at birth and rejoice at death. And the idea is a person that is deceased is now truly free of earthly burdens and troubles, and they're gone on, hopefully, to a greater reward in union with the Creator. So instead of being sad about that, we should be happy for that person. So that's what the joyous aspect of the music represents. And it's also a reflection of one final look at the joyous times that you had with this person on earth. So if we play the same song, which we could do, in the last part of a jazz funeral, the trumpet player might be playing like this. That's the musician's call. It means they're about to start. And the bass drum would start it out with 3 beats. chorus before, but that was the verse and the chorus. So while that's going on, the clarinet could be doing a lot of things. I could be answering that melody. The trumpet is going right there. There's a space for me to answer. I could play a harmony to that. You know, as I said, similar notes, same rhythm, but different notes that blend in. So while he's going, I could go. Or I could play rhythmically. We were talking about rhythm. So when he's going on the trumpet, I can do something like this. Type of riff that may be even stronger in contributing to the rhythm. It depends on what else is going on, but I could play a simple riff that's something like this. When the trumpet is going, I can do. You could vary the way you do that. You could play the rhythm behind the melody like this. So even that is improvised and endless. And it becomes part of a collective creative process that is both personal and collectively improvised at the same time. And it could be, sometimes it's a train wreck, but it could be actually a lot of fun if people understand and kind of follow the loosely defined general role of the instrument.
Which is very family-like, right?
Yeah, well, yes, definitely family and community, because in New Orleans we have a lot of musical families, but that extend into neighborhoods and communities. And that's why we have so many unique cultural traditions. Jazz is one of them that people know about, but there are other traditions that we have that pretty much are unique to New Orleans, like the Mardi Gras Indian tradition, the Skull and Bones gangs, the social aid and pleasure clubs, and the baby dolls that people generally don't know about. But these are each very unique local traditions, and usually they're music related.
All right. Now, well, we took a simple song. That's not a complex piece of composition.
No, it basically has 3 chord changes.
It's not Burgundy Street Blues, in which I'm not asking to play, or anything complex. But look how far he took that apart, and how he interpreted it to be different voices for different times. And you really haven't quite touched the surface on that. But to move on. That's using the situation, in this case a funeral, in the 3 parts of a funeral: the early morning, not sunrise, and then the preacher saying something, and then some celebration. That's using that composition to express those ideas. But there's different ways of composing. One of the old ways is repetition of theme. Right? And you and I were talking about that at dinner the other night, and I wanted you to know that Michael asked me to do this. And so we'll do it. Should we do a little, so if we were painting a theme, and we'll do it quickly, and you'll play a theme while I'm painting it?
Okay.
Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Well, we don't know if this is going to work. We haven't done this part of it. There's usually a lot of profanity about this point. Like, where's my clip? Well, I don't have a clip. It doesn't matter. I don't need a clip. So if we were going to do this, let's try it. like this. Yeah, if I were going to paint a theme, one of the most traditional themes in painting, as far as repetition of a single shape, is a triangle, isn't it? So if I paint that as a triangle, is that all right? You're going to play a triangle for me?
Triangle, okay.
Well, I don't know. You can just leave me up here by myself.
Well, as some of you know, in music, the most common form of music, you have 4 beats to every measure of music, right? And so a triangle has 3 sides, so I'm going to make up a figure that has just the first 3 beats. If the measure is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Can you see that as a triangle?
Yeah. Is that fair? Okay. So 1, 2, 3 beats.
You want me to paint to that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then how about if I do a little triangle right here?
Okay, and I'll repeat that.
So I tie those 2 together. And I paint another little triangle right there. And a smaller triangle right here. And a tiny one right here.
I can play any softer.
Well, you paint it loud, that's okay. And how about a decent sized one right here? So we're just putting these together in kind of what appears to be a random method. Is that fair enough? You just keep doing triangles and I'll keep painting.
Okay.
Another big triangle. A little triangle. And another little triangle. And we're repeating a thing. We'll keep going. I'm not done yet. If they're all hard edges, something happens, but you can slur a note in this, can't you? So can you play the note with slurring part of it? Sure. Really? And so if I come across here, people again?
We could slur, yeah.
Yeah. About me just coming out with a finished painting, but when we're all done, when we did this something like this the other night, we talked about oh, this is I don't want to be known for this, but when we talked about this the other night, he said if you show the finished thing, no one will believe that you did it with triangles. Because when we talk about composing with painting, people say, oh, no, the triangles didn't matter, he copied the model. No. I think about those things. I organize it into that kind of order. And that kind of wide base says stability. That wide base triangle is what we find in Madonnas and whatnot. You can't knock them over. They have the sense. All right. So does that help a little? We got theme? And it does relate to music and painting. Da 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 da. You know, you take Beethoven's Fifth. I could use a fifth right about now. All right.
So that certainly does parallel, because what I did was use that figure over 3 beats. Da di 1 2 3. Da di 1 2 3. I used that figure and varied on it to create a form, and the whole form, like his finished face, was actually a 12-bar blues chorus. Okay, so that figure is repeated, but then it starts to go over the form. did, I could change the size and the shape of that triangular melody, if you will, to sound different. Instead of just, notice sometimes we, so we're doing the same type of thing with different mediums, but
But it's both art. That's the part that's the same. And I kind of wish I had that recording because I could paint to that. Just have that on a long loop. But can you remember that? Because you'll be able to paint the triangles. Will you try that when you get, everybody says, oh yeah, I'll do that, and they do the same thing. Where do you want to take this right now?
well, I mean, we were making that up, but we have, there are
We never really rehearsed that. I said, will you tell me what the sound's going to be? He goes, no, I'll surprise you.
Well, it's because I realized, again, finally after many years of being a jazz musician, that there is such a thing as a jazz life. And that means that I'm not just improvising and creating when I have a horn in my hand. It's like it's a way of life and a lifestyle. So you're always creating, you're always improvising and thinking. And that's saved me and got me out of a lot of situations. But you learn to be creative and improvise all the time. So when it's time to play your instrument, it makes it easier and better in a way. So there are a lot of songs in the jazz tradition, actual songs that were built up off of simple themes too. The one that I'm thinking about right now, I'll give you a quick example of it. We're thinking about Duke Ellington, and one of his classic early songs is a song called Creole Love Call. And it is based off of a really simple figure that's repeated, but it was part of what was called a tone poem, and it created a certain kind of mood. And it was just this. It's based on two notes. Then it changes. So, again, music, art doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes you can come up with some really incredible things based on simplicity. Simplicity of form, simplicity of concept and ideas.
Good. We talked about rhythm, and we haven't done anything near this before. But do you want to talk about that, or do you want to just talk about the season? About it, about how sometimes the time of year, like last week was still springtime. It's summertime.
Okay.
Wasn't there a song you play that, or do you want to end on that one?
Well, are we close to the end?
No, we're closer than
maybe we can end on that. Yeah.
All right, that'd be fine. But you can use the seasons, or I think that Creole love song is about emotions, whether it be love or death or birth or whatever. All of these things, and if he's moved you with some of this with his horn, you have advantages as artists to move people with your brushes. And you have to remember that it's what you have to say. And when you talk about the creativity of a lifestyle, that's kind of what Philip Pearlstein was talking about last night, how many times he used his art to stay out of the front during World War II. We do these kind of things. So, what do you want to talk about?
Sure,
Rhythm?
we can talk about rhythm. Rhythm is very, very important. Again, what I learned from a lot of the older musicians, they could play in 4/4 rhythm all day and it would never sound boring or the same. They would vary the accents on where they would place, where they place the accents, they vary. Like sometimes on the 1 and the 3, or the 2 and the 4, or just the 1, or just the 4, or they would change that, and they would make it interesting. They would vary the notes that they played on the rhythms, and that made it interesting. So we use rhythm in quite a lot of ways. It's very important. When I try to write, when I'm composing a song, I'm always thinking about the rhythm. And like, you know, if you had basic 4/4 rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, there was a musician in history, very important in the annals of jazz history, named Sidney Bechet. How many of you have heard of Sidney Bechet? Oh, more people than in New Orleans. That's great. But Sidney Bechet was from New Orleans, and he was the first great jazz improviser on record. And he was a very, sometimes gentle, but sometimes very aggressive personality. He spent many years living up here in New York. He recorded and played with some bands up here. And rhythm was very important, but the idea of Sidney Bechet inspired one of my early compositions. It's called The Chant of Bechet. And I thought about some of the things that he was known for. They said that there was quite a lot of animosity early on between New Orleans musicians and some of the musicians up here, because in New Orleans we have a different kind of way of playing and different outlook, you know, and we think that we're it, you know. We think that that's where jazz started and that's the end of the world. So Bechet was known for, and Armstrong and several others, but known for having these famous jazz battles. Musicians would come in jam sessions and try to outplay him, try to cut him, as they used to say. And Sidney Bechet was known for that. So there's a legendary story about one time the great tenor saxophonist Coleman Hawkins said some not so nice things about New Orleans musicians. Oh, they can't play. So Sidney Bechet heard about it, and he sent a letter said, have Mr. Hawkins meet me at a certain place at a certain time. So they met and did battles. And they picked, you know, you pick a song, I pick a song. And Sidney Bechet got angry. He played so much that Coleman Hawkins gave up. He said, okay, y'all can play now. Sidney Bechet kept playing, and as Coleman Hawkins put on his coat, left, went outside, got in a cab. Bechet was still playing in the cab. So I thought about Sidney Bechet using and wielding his instrument like a weapon. And I thought about him anxiously marching to battle. And that image drew to me him in a coat carrying his horn. You know, it was kind of a mix between, I guess, World War I at the time and Sidney Bechet. So I thought about him marching. So the rhythm I thought about, it was 4/4. But it wasn't just 1, 2, 3, 4. It was kind of a little bit staccato in imitation of footsteps. So this is what I had the bass play as a bass line. Can you hear like the footstep thing? Yeah. So that was the beginning of the song. And that's what everything was based on, that rhythm, and that was very important. The melody, let's see, it's been a while since I played it, but against that, the melody is sort of like this. So even in those little figures, that played with the rhythm sometimes, those figures. You know, that plays with the rhythm that's going on. Last week, I had another honor. Wasn't as great as this one, though, being here with Tim Clark. But last week I had the opportunity to kind of sneak back in New Orleans for a couple of days, and I performed for the King and Queen of Spain.
That's better than me. And where we tell them what the venue was?
It was at the New Orleans Museum of Art. Right. And has anyone been to the New Orleans? You have, okay. So that was a great, you too. It was a great venue. And we had a short cultural program. I was able to speak in Spanish, porque yo hablo español. Fui profesor de español por 25 años. I said I was able to speak in Spanish. I was a Spanish teacher for 25 years.
Pero no más.
La música es mi vida. Music is my life. So, they wanted us to show the cultural relationship between New Orleans and Spain. The reason the king and queen were there was to help us celebrate the 300-year anniversary of New Orleans, the tricentennial of the founding of New Orleans. And some of you may know Spain owned Louisiana and New Orleans for about 40 years. They got it from France, then they gave it back after 40 years, and then right after that, the Americans got hold of it. And it's been downhill ever since. But that's another story. So they were there to honor that. And so we wanted to show the cultural relationship between Spain and New Orleans using our musical traditions. And that was the task that the city officials charged me with. I was like, how the hell am I going to do that? So I thought about it for a while, and we did 3 songs. The first song we did was an old march called Panama. And what that showed and demonstrated was that a traditional European form, like the march, if any of you played in high school or college bands, you remember marches is the hardest thing you ever played, because the march has several forms, you know, several choruses, changes of key, changes of moods, you know, it's difficult and involved. But in New Orleans, they took marches and improvised the way they were played. They were freed up. They were given new life, new meaning, and new possibilities. You could add bent tones and growls and vibrato and your own rhythms in the way these marches are played, and you collectively improvise. So we demonstrated that as one example. Our closing song, which they made me play, was When the Saints Go Marching In. So, well, how am I going to tie that into Spanish? So they were like, well, you could sing it in Spanish. Well, I don't sing. But I ended up, you know, Cuando los Santos, right? And we did that, and they liked that. But the thing that was surprising and that really got the attention of the royal family was that I composed a new piece that I called Andalusian Strut. That was a mix between New Orleans jazz and Spanish flamenco music. And we used a common 4-bar chord changes, did a cadenza, and the common 4-bar chord changes, you might recognize this. This is the kind of thing trumpets and guitars might play over these chords. Let's see, what key was it in? A week ago is a long time. Let's see. Okay. Armstrong Hot 5 in 1926 had played that. And so we came up with a melody in rhythm, New Orleans kind of time, against that simple 4-bar structure. And the melody we came up with was something like this. I don't remember that. I'm having one of those brain things you were talking about.
Yeah. We were talking the other night about getting older, and one of us said to the other, what's that old disease that people get when they get older? They lose their mind? What's the name of that? Neither one of us could come up with Alzheimer's, you know.
Let's see if I can remember right. I have that other melody in my head now. Let's see. It's something like this. And so we made up a whole chorus off of that and improvised, and then we went into something that was more like a traditional extended blues form. Instead of 12 bars, it was 32 bars, But in the end, we were able to use the Spanish motif in the release. And so it was a really nice blend and mix between traditional Spanish folk music, at least flamenco music, and the New Orleans jazz tradition, and that went over very well. At a certain point, the king kind of let loose, and he was going on with the rhythm. Then he caught himself like, "Oh, I'm the king." So that was funny. But once again, rhythm was an important part of that, because at first we started out with a cadenza without rhythm, playing rubato. And then we took that and went into a rhythm that had the familiarity of the Spanish chord, but New Orleans feel, flavor, and type rhythm. So rhythm is always extremely important in music. And again, I've been fortunate enough to come up here for the last few years and coach some of the jazz students at Juilliard who are now being forced to learn New Orleans jazz, but they're enjoying it. And two of the most important things I tell them, one is about style and the other is about rhythm. And that this music is dance music, and even if people are not actually dancing, if they're sitting there like a concert, you have to make them feel like they want to dance. You have to play the rhythm in such a way that it goes beyond whatever else is going on, and it becomes the thing that infuses into their mind and melody. And it makes them want to be part of that creative process, because they'll tap their feet, they'll clap. That means they're feeling it, they're hearing it, And that's what you want to do. Rhythm is very important. And I also believe, of course, that those rhythms line up with parts of our body similar to our heartbeats. And so I even sometimes look at those kind of things, the heartbeat, and take those rhythms and try to use that in music.
Right, and it's massively important in painting. If the painter can't get a sense of rhythm through their work, the work just dies. And it's like playing that first song with just no, with like typing, and it just doesn't work. And so you have to find a way to get rhythm into your painting. And there are people here who teach that. It's good. One of the things that is really important. There was another musician who you never got a chance to work with, but he was the upright bass player for John Coltrane. And he wound up getting a doctorate degree. He was a doctor of psychology and was part of this study that said listening to classical music raises your IQ by, I think, 15 points, which is a lot. It doesn't last, but he did a similar program with me out on the West Coast, and I remember him saying that they furthered the study, but they didn't have enough people. But he said jazz makes you even smarter. You agree with that?
And maybe because it captures a wide range of universal passions and emotions, every style of jazz that people can relate to. So it kind of gets in your soul.
Right, absolutely does. I don't see anybody fidgeting. There are two people left because they were afraid they were in Frank O'Kane's class, and he would mark them tardy, but Frank isn't going to. And we have to be careful on this because you and I have a couple more things to talk about. But does anybody have a question from the floor right now? I don't want to go too much after 1 o'clock because some of you need to paint. The gentleman in the back who's doing all the work. Really louder if you can.
In painting, we have a basic material, or not material, red, blue, and yellow. Is there anything like that in music, that how we manipulate those three colors can make what we do? Is there something as simple as music? Simple. Music is not simple. What? Like, in other words, what's on my mind is rhythm, tonal quality, emphasis.
There is. He's got an answer.
There is. A lot of the older musicians, like Sidney Bechet, used to talk about when he gave the few lessons that he gave, he'd tell somebody to take one note, and that would be their whole practice session and what they had to work on. see how many ways they could play that one note, bend it, shape it, use vibrato, make it sound different ways. That was a way of trying to find the individual colors, if you will, of your instrument and of your own personal expression. I try to do that. Some notes sing out better than others. But perhaps the ultimate example of using tone color would come from Duke Ellington, who used an entire orchestra, and he's often compared to an artist that paints, because what he did, which is very unusual, like for example, if you listen to the Duke Ellington Orchestra today, and please don't tell anybody I said this because I tell you a lie, but if you listen to the Duke Ellington Orchestra today, they don't really sound anything like the Duke Ellington Orchestra, the real Duke Ellington Orchestra was something very special, even though as it evolved over the years, because the musicians were hand-picked because they had individual sounds. It wasn't the idea of just getting a good trumpet player, a good saxophonist, a good trombone player. It was the idea of getting someone who had a unique individual voice with a lot of color in it, and that those colors could blend with other sounds. So he wrote songs for individual musicians, and he blended those instruments in such a way that when he played, there was a different sound or color, if you will. And so it's often compared to color in that sense, the way he manipulated the sound of individual instruments. I got to meet several of the musicians that played with Duke Ellington, but my biggest delight was hearing and meeting the New Orleans clarinetist Barney Bigard, who had a very rich, unique sound. And I talked to him a lot about that sound. But when you listen to those recordings and stuff, you hear that it's a color, it's a certain kind of color in sound, if you will. So Ellington was, of course, probably the leading figure in American music, at least in jazz, in terms of creating those unique colors of different instruments and blending them together.
Right. Those of you who came here late didn't know, but Duke Ellington studied painting at the Art Students League. He was a painting student right here. He spent time in his room. So it'll rub off on you now, I hope. And people like Ben Webster had an absolutely unique sound. Again, an Ellington graduate, really went on his own. And Gay Ellington used to tell me that if anybody acted up, Duke really didn't reprimand him. He just gave him solo after solo after solo. Is that true? Huh? It is. So the Duke's granddaughter is here today, and she has a painting in the National Portrait Gallery here in Washington. One more question, maybe. Yes.
When it comes to creating music, have you ever had a moment where you were resonating at a different frequency? You had to create a music which was at a different frequency. Say you were joyful and you had to create a piece which was just the opposite. How do you?
Yeah, I've had that before. I had a
You guys hear you didn't hear the question. She said if you were in a sad mood but were supposed to write something that was up-tempo and bright, how do you deal with that? Is that kind of the question? And we've had to do that as painters sometimes, but I don't know, we tend to get to follow our own feelings a little more.
After Hurricane Katrina, in which I had a horrible evacuation experience and lost my home and everything I've owned and people that I knew and all of that.
How many clarinets ruined?
More than 60.
Sheet music by?
A lot of sheet music, books, recordings. I had interviewed a lot of those older musicians. I lost all of those interviews, photographs.
That mouthpiece from the clarinet
I had a
for me. Remember?
Mouthpiece that, yes. And also a mouthpiece from Sidney Bechet, one that you see in pictures. I couldn't find that stuff. I had collected so much. But after that, things were very, very tragic, and sad. And I had a residency at a place called the Studio in the Woods. And I went there to write, and I wanted to write music that represented the current mood of New Orleans. And it ended up, the songs ended up being on a CD called Blue Crescent. And I was sad, and everything I wrote was in a minor mood. Everything kind of sounded like this. And I couldn't believe it, but after a while out there, this place is in the woods, a lot of the songs came out upbeat and optimistic. And I use that as hope and optimism for the future. And only one or two songs on the CD is even sad. There's one song that I don't listen to called Katrina, and it's like the different musicians recounting their experience in song against different melodies and also improvising. But so that was interesting for me. They didn't say right up tempo. I was free to do what I wanted, but it was interesting that I was in such a sad state of mind and sad mood, and then many of the songs came out happy, optimistic, and upbeat. So that kind of thing happens, yeah.
But you have a buoyant personality. No matter what bad thing happens, after a few minutes, you're back up. Well, you do float high.
Katrina took a while though, because that was
we know.
That was quite shocking. I had never seen anything like that. And you know, when we were evacuated in Houston, we had weeks of seeing that on television 24/7. We were addicted to the television. You couldn't help but be. But you know, you lament the tragedy of other people, tsunamis here, fires there, earthquakes. But when you actually see your own neighborhoods and sometimes people you know, and your own house and everything, that's really tough. Right. Your life's work, your life's collections, that's really, really tough.
Now, I got out of having to paint rhythms, so they'll come to my class and learn that. But how do you want to take this out?
Well, you mentioned, you know, Sidney
Burgundy
Bechet
or summertime?
Yeah, Sidney Bechet had something that very few musicians had. In 1939, he had a hit record. Very few jazz musicians ever have a hit record. So he had a hit record when he became one of the first musicians to give his own interpretation of the George Gershwin classic Summertime. And when he did that, though, it was a little bit of a New Orleans type sound that made the difference, and that remains as one of the classic versions of the song, despite it being played by musicians of every genre and singers of, countless singers of every genre. So one of the things is Bechet had an operatic sort of approach sometimes. He mixed like opera concepts and blues concepts. So he would always start off the songs with like cadenzas, and this is not exactly, it's not copying him, but this is similar to what he did to start the song off. He would go something like this. Silence, and then you get into the melody. And then he would vary each chorus very slightly building. And in the end, he would come to a climax and play like high notes, sort of like this. After this part, he might go. Using rhythm.
this entire community, these artists, these people who care about art more than anything else, we thank you for gracing us today. We thank you for bringing us.